Book 7, The Rebellion of Vercingetorix, Part 1, The Opening Stage, 52 BC. 1. On his arrival in Italy, Caesar was told of the assassination of Publius Clodius and of a senatorial decree ordering all Italians of military age to be sworn in. He proceeded to enroll recruits in all parts of the Cisalpine province. The news of these events soon reached Gaul, and the Gauls, drawing what they thought was the natural inference, invented a story that Caesar was detained by the disturbances in Rome, where political strife was so acute, they said, that he could not rejoin his army. The prospect of such a chance spurred them into action. They were already smarting under their subjection to Rome, and now began to plan war with greater confidence and boldness. The leading men arranged meetings at secluded spots in the woods, where they spoke bitterly of the execution of Acco, and pointed out that the same fate might befall them next. They complained of the miserable condition of the whole country, and offered tempting rewards to induce some of their hearers to open hostilities and risk their lives for the liberty of Gaul. The first step, they said, was to contrive means of cutting Caesar off from his army before their plot was divulged. This could easily be done, because the legions would not dare to leave their winter quarters in the absence of their commander-in-chief, and he would not be able to reach them without an escort. In any case, it was better to die in battle than to resign themselves to the loss of their ancient military glory and the liberty inherited from their ancestors. 2. These discussions ended with a declaration by the Carnutes that they were prepared to face any danger for the common cause, and would undertake to strike the first blow. As it was not possible at the moment to give mutual guarantee by exchange of hostages, for fear their design should be betrayed, the Carnutes called upon the others to stack their military standards together, a most solemn rite according to Gallic custom, and to bind themselves by an oath not to desert them once hostilities were begun. The Carnutes were warmly congratulated by the assembly. All present took the oath, and before separating fixed a date for the rising. 3. When the appointed day arrived, the Carnutes, led by two desperadoes named Gutuata and Concaneta Domnus, swooped down at a given signal on Cenabum, killed the Romans who had settled there for purposes of commerce, including Gaius Fufius Sita, a Roman knight of high standing, whom Caesar had put in charge of the commissariat, and plundered their property. Tidings of these events sped swiftly to all the tribes of Gaul, for when anything specially important or remarkable occurs, the people shout the news to one another through the countryside and villages, and others in turn take up the cry and pass it on to their neighbours. Thus, on the present occasion, what happened at Cenabum at dawn was known before 8 o'clock at night in the country of the Arverni, about 150 miles away. 4. There, the lead given by the Carnutes was followed by Vercingetorix, a very powerful young Arvernian, whose father, Celtulus, had held suzerainty over all Gaul, and had been put to death by his compatriots for seeking to make himself king. Assembling his retainers, Vercingetorix had no difficulty in exciting their passions, and the news of what was afoot soon brought others out in arms. An effort to restrain him was made by his uncle Gobanetio and other chiefs, who thought the enterprise too risky, and he was expelled from the town of Gergovia. Undeterred, however, he went round the countryside raising a band of vagabonds and beggars. With these at his back, he was able to win over all the Arvernians whom he approached. Calling upon them to take up arms for the freedom of Gaul, he assembled a large force and succeeded in expelling the opponents by whom, not long before, he had been driven out himself. He was proclaimed king by his adherents, and sent embassies in every direction, adjuring the tribes to keep faith. In a short time he had secured the support of the Senones, Parisii, Cadorcae, Turonii, Aulercae, Lemoises, Andes, Pictones, and all the other tribes of the west coast, who unanimously elected him commander-in-chief. Armed with this power, he ordered each tribe to give hostages, to bring a specified quota of troops at once, and to manufacture a specified quantity of arms by a certain date, paying particular attention to the cavalry arm. Himself a man of boundless energy, he terrorized waverers with the rigors of an iron discipline. Serious cases of disaffection were punished by torture and death at the stake, and even for a minor fault he would cut off a man's ears or gouge out one of his eyes and send him home to serve as a warning to others of the severe chastisement meted out to offenders. 5. By this terrorism he quickly raised an army, part of which he sent into the territory of the Ruteni under a cadercan of great daring named Lucterius. Vercingetorix himself marched against the Deprive, who at his approach sent envoys to their overlords, the AUDIOBOOK, asking for help to enable them to offer a more effective resistance. On the advice of the generals whom Caesar had left with the army, the AUDIOBOOK sent cavalry and infantry to aid the Deprive. When these reached the Loire, however, the boundary between the Deprive and the AUDIOBOOK, they halted and after a few days turned back without venturing to cross it. The explanation they gave to the generals was that they were afraid of treachery on the part of the Deprive, who, according to information they had received, had concerted a plan with the Arverni to cut them off on both sides if they crossed the river. Whether they really acted for the reason they alleged, or from motives of treachery, I do not know for certain, and therefore do not feel justified in making a positive statement. On the departure of the AUDIOBOOK, the Deprive immediately joined forces with the Arverni. 6. By the time news of these events reached Caesar in Italy, the situation in Rome had improved, thanks to the resolute action of Pompey, and accordingly he set out for Gaul. On arriving, he was faced with a difficult problem. How was he to rejoin his army? If he summoned the legions to the Transalpine province, they would clearly have to fight a pitched battle on the march without him, and to travel across Gaul without an escort would mean risking his own life, since in the circumstances even the tribes that were apparently quiet could not be relied upon. 7. In the meantime, Lucterius, the cadercan who had been sent to the Ruteni, induced them to join the Arverni. Advancing into the territory of the Nitiobroges and the Gabali, he took hostages from both, and after assembling a strong force attempted to make a raid into the province in the direction of Narbonne. Caesar decided that he must let everything else wait. Marching at once to the town, he reassured the frightened inhabitants and posted detachments of the garrison troops in the districts that lay near the point of attack, i.e. the part of the province inhabited by the Ruteni, Volcae, Aricomicae, and Tolesates, and the neighbourhood of Narbonne itself. He also ordered a part of the provincial garrison and a fresh draft that he had brought from Italy to concentrate in the territory of the Helvii, which adjoins that of the Arverni. 8. These measures checked Lucterius and made him keep his distance because he was afraid to venture into the area encircled by the Roman detachments. Accordingly, Caesar joined the forces assembled in the country of the Helvii. The Cevennes mountains, which form a barrier between the Helvii and the Arverni, were at this season, the severest part of the winter, covered with very deep snow, and the passes blocked. But the soldiers cleared stretches of the path by shoveling away drifts up to 6 feet deep, and by prodigious exertions enabled Caesar to get across into the land of the Arverni. Taking them completely by surprise, for they thought that the Cevennes gave them as secure protection as a solid wall, since the passes had never been considered practicable even for single travellers at that time of year, Caesar ordered his cavalry to scour the widest possible area and frighten the Gauls as much as they could. Rumours and dispatches soon brought the news to Vercingetorix, and in the greatest alarm all his Arvernian supporters came running to him, begging him to save them from ruin and not to let their country be pillaged by the enemy. They had a right to claim protection, they said, since it was obvious that they were now bearing the brunt of the attack. In response to their entreaties, he moved his camp from the country of the Bituriges and marched towards that of the Arverni. 9. But Caesar stayed there only 2 days, because he had anticipated Vercingetorix's move. Then, on the pretext of collecting reinforcements and cavalry, he went away, leaving the troops under the command of the young Brutus. He instructed him to send out the cavalry as far as possible in every direction, and announced that he would try not to be away from the camp longer than 3 days. After making these arrangements, to the great surprise of his escort, he made his way post-haste to Vienne. There he picked up some fresh cavalry which he had sent on some time before, and without stopping night or day pushed on through the country of the Aedui into that of the Lingones, where 2 legions were wintering, for he thought it possible that the Aedui might go so far as to make an attempt on his life, and wished to forestall this by making all the speed he could. Directly he arrived at the winter camp, he sent word to the other legions, and had them all concentrated before the news of his coming could reach the Arverni. When he did get to know of it, Vercingetorix led his army back into the country of the Bituriges, and from there marched to attack Golgobina, a stronghold of the Boii, whom Caesar, after defeating them in the battle with the Helvetii, had established there under the suzerainty of the Aedui. 10. This move greatly embarrassed Caesar. If he kept the legions all together until the end of the winter, and allowed a people subject to the Aedui to be overpowered without interference, it was only too likely that the whole of Gaul would desert his cause, since it would be evident that his friends could not look to him for protection. On the other hand, if he withdrew the troops from their quarters so early in the year, he might be hard put to it to supply them with food, owing to the difficulties of transport. He thought it better, however, to face any risk, rather than alienate all his supporters by submitting to such a loss of prestige. Accordingly, he asked the Aedui to send up supplies, and sent forward a message to the Boii, saying that he was on his way to their relief, and urging them to remain loyal and resist the enemy's attack courageously. Then, leaving 2 legions at Agedincum with the heavy baggage of the entire army, he set out for the country of the Boii. 11. The next day he reached Velarnodonum, a stronghold of the Senones, and, in order to facilitate the movement of supplies by ensuring that he left no enemy in his rear, laid siege to it. In 2 days he had encircled it with entrenchments, and on the 3rd day the garrison sent out envoys to surrender. Caesar ordered them to deposit all their arms in one place, bring out their horses, and give 600 hostages. As he wanted to complete his journey to Golgobina as soon as possible, he left Trebonius to see to the execution of these orders, and himself set out for Cenabum, in the territory of the Carnutes. The Carnutes, who had only just heard of the siege of Velarnodonum and expected that it would last some time, were engaged in collecting troops to send to the defense of Cenabum. Caesar reached this town in 2 days, but by the time he had encamped in front of it, it was too late to attack that day. He therefore directed the necessary preparations to be made for an assault on the next day, and as there was a bridge over the Loire right under the town walls, and he was afraid that the inhabitants might escape under cover of night, he ordered 2 legions to remain under arms all night. Shortly after midnight, the people of Cenabum moved silently out of the town and began to cross the river. Apprised of this by the patrols, Caesar set the gates on fire and sent inside the legions he had kept ready for action. The town was captured, and all but a very few of the enemy taken prisoner, for the narrow streets and bridge were blocked by the crowd of fugitives. After plundering and burning Cenabum, and distributing among his soldiers the booty it contained and the prisoners, Caesar marched across the Loire and made his way into the territory of the Bituriges. 12. At his approach, Vercingetorix raised the siege of Gorgobina and marched out to meet him. Caesar had laid siege to a stronghold of the Bituriges called Noviodunum, which lay upon his line of march, when envoys came to him from the garrison, begging him to pardon them and spare their lives. As he wanted to complete the campaign with the same speed that had already brought him so many successes, he granted their petition, ordering them to collect all their arms in one place, bring out their horses, and furnish hostages. A part of the hostages had already been delivered up, and some centurions had been sent into the town with a small party of soldiers to collect the arms and horses, when the cavalry preceding Vercingetorix's main body was seen in the distance. Directly the besieged townsmen caught sight of it and thought there was a chance of being relieved, they raised a cheer and began to snatch up their arms, shut the gates, and man the wall. The centurions inside the town, realizing from the cheering that some fresh scheme was afoot, seized the gate sword in hand and got their men away without a single casualty. 13. Caesar ordered his Gallic cavalry out of the camp and engaged Vercingetorix's horse. When the cavalry got into difficulties, he reinforced it with 400 German horsemen whom he had kept with his army from the start of this campaign. Their charge overpowered the enemy, who were put to flight and fell back with heavy loss on their main body. Their defeat made the defenders of Noviodunum change their minds once more. Terror-stricken, they laid hands on those they thought responsible for instigating the people against the Romans, hauled them off to Caesar, and surrendered. Noviodunum being thus disposed of, Caesar advanced on Auricum, a very large and strongly defended town situated in a particularly fertile part of the Biturigan country, as he felt sure that its capture would secure the submission of the whole tribe.